prepared, but Jaciel is here as well as Alejandro. They're from Kids in Need um, of
Defense.
Defense. Yeah, I was like,
Yeah,
what's the D for? I can't forget.
it's
Um,
early.
but yeah, it is. It's way too early. But anyways, what they do is they're working with kids in who are at the border trying to get into the country. Most of the kids, from my understanding, are refugees. A lot of them have come here individually. They're older teenagers, but they're all minor. They're minor children. Or I think there are occasions they can tell us better, but that deal with families. But we really, really appreciate the work they're doing, and we're really excited to hear about what's going on, especially with all the changes in the government. Now a new administration's coming in. What kind of things may or will be happening, and what can be done to help these kids have homes somewhere. Anyways, thank you so much for coming again.
And let me just jump one thing. So if any of the kids have been separated from their parents by the border authorities, we'd like to hear about that as well.
Yeah, definitely. I have a section that touches on the lead up to the separation and then what's been happening as of 2020. So I'm happy to, highlight
Good,
more
good.
info.
Great. Thank you.
So I'm not sure if I should just jump into the presentation
Please
or.
do. Please do.
All right, all
Hey,
right.
go ahead.
So thank you, Mary, for that introduction. As mentioned, my name is Josiel Moreira. I'm a senior attorney with Kids in Need of Defense, and I'm here today with my colleague Alejandra Quintero. She's the I don't know if Alejandra, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, my name is Alejandra Quintero. I'm the social service coordinator. So basically, my job is to connect both the staff, so my coworkers like Josiel, as well as other attorneys, other paralegals, and the clients with referral resources that have to do with health, educational, or also, honestly, everything else. We take a holistic approach at Kids in Need of Defense, so we understand in order to support the immigration case, we really have to make sure that we're able to support them in other aspects in their life. So if some kind of situation is happening at the school, or if they do have access or they have the right to health insurance, that's where I step in, and that's where I make those connections. For example, if a client is in need of therapy, etc. I could talk more about that later, but hello, good
Yeah.
morning.
And let me just say off the bat, she was instrumental last year when the pandemic hit. As you can imagine, us attorneys are very good at the legal side of things, but Alejandra really stepped it up and did a lot of hard work to try to make sure our kids were connected with the appropriate resources, food banks. I'll let her talk about it, but I wanted to give, I feel like she undersells herself. So what I'll do is share my screen with the PowerPoint slide. There you are. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. So
Kids in Need of Defense.
I just wanted to give a little background on who we are, the type of kids we work with before jumping into updates regarding immigration and what we can expect coming into 2021. So as mentioned, we're Kids in Need of Defense. Our mission is to ensure that no kid goes to immigration court without legal representation. Unlike in criminal court, there actually is no right to an attorney in immigration court, which is interesting. I've always thought it was interesting because when you look on the news, the two are very comparable, right? You have courts, detention centers, people showing up in shackles, and yet in immigration court, even if you're a child of 1 year old, 2 years old, there's no right to an attorney. So Kids in Need of Defense really work hard to make sure that no kid goes to immigration court unrepresented. The way we do this is by placing children with volunteer attorneys in the community or through our in-house attorneys in each of our field offices. We have offices located in 10 major places, including New York, Los Angeles, pretty much areas that would have high immigration traffic. So as we mentioned, we helped primarily unaccompanied children. These are children who come to the United States. They typically come alone, or as we'll talk about, are separated from their parents and are therefore alone and are under the age of 18 years old. And these children, having no one in the United States, are the ones that we really want to try to help the most. So as I mentioned, and I'm going through this section a little quickly just because I do want to talk about the immigration stuff. I feel like that's more important and I want to make sure I give due time to that. So I apologize if I go quickly, and if there's any questions, please feel free to ask. So as I mentioned, the way we help children is one of two ways. It's either by placing the kids with a volunteer attorney in the community. And what we do is that at Kind, we'll give this attorney the resources, guidance, mentoring, everything they need to move forward on the case successfully. But essentially, they're the attorney for the child. And we really want to encourage them to take on cases so that they can see the need that's there and also have a good experience helping children where they can. We also have attorneys in-house that provide more direct representation. Typically, this isn't 100% all the case, but typically the cases that are in-house that stay with us are the more difficult cases, the cases that wouldn't be appropriate to place with a volunteer. I kind of see it as the public defender model, in the sense of if it's too hard or no one can help the kids, they'll stay in-house with the attorneys. But primarily, we try to place the children with volunteer attorneys in the community, because that way we can help more children in the long run. So some statistics, I focus specifically on fiscal year 2019, just because I feel like that's a better representative of the type of kids that come to the US. You'll see why I didn't want to touch on fiscal year 2020, but the majority of the children, unaccompanied children, come from Central America. This is going to be Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, and the other countries. 2% come from Mexico, whereas the remaining 5% come from all over the world. So as you can see, the majority of the children that come to the United States are Latino or Central American. The large majority of the kids that do come are between the ages of 13 to 18, although our office does represent kids as young as newborns that were born outside of the US to 17 years old. And the majority of the kids are male, with 66% male, 34% females. And as you can see through these numbers, the number of children has slowly been increasing over the years. Fiscal year 2019, we saw almost 70,000 kids come to the United States. Fiscal year 2020, only 15,000, but as you can imagine, that's gonna be due to the pandemic. The borders were closed at that time. There was a lot of trying to keep the immigrants outside in general, outside of just the pandemic. And then due to the pandemic, the borders were closed, limiting the number of people coming into the United States. So even though there's only 15,000, that's just due to what happened last year.
A question?
Yes.
In your title, what does the UC stand for?
Sorry, UC, so unaccompanied children.
I see, okay.
Yeah, so I'm gonna be using the term unaccompanied children, UCs, UACs, and probably just children in general. So it's just to simplify things. So what are some of the reasons for coming to the US? As Mary mentioned, a lot of these kids are essentially refugees. They're gonna be coming to the United States in order to escape violence. The bolded bullet points are the main reasons why we see a lot of these kids coming to the US. For example, domestic violence within the home. They might be experiencing violence from their parents, their grandparents, their caretakers, or even their significant other. A lot of the time, these children, even though they're underage, are forced into relationships with gang members or other adults that end up mistreating them or abusing them. You have sexual exploitation, gang violence, gender-based violence, and then also we've seen in the past things like poverty, violence towards the LGBT community, natural disasters, and what have you. But as you can see, a large majority of the children coming are coming to escape violence, to escape harm, to escape trauma. They do come in part to reunify with family members here in the United States. Sometimes the parents come to the US in order to provide a better life to their children back home. But due to some need or circumstance, the children have to come to the US to live a better life. So in terms of what it means to come to the United States, It's crazy. I'm not going to lie. I mean, I know for myself, I live in Orange County, and when I had to travel to downtown LA for when I started with Kind, I was scared. I didn't know the public transit system. I didn't know trains and any of that stuff. And so I myself as an adult was worried. But these children, they're not doing anything like that. They're doing something greater. They're traveling through countries. Oftentimes, they're traveling through Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador on their own, and they're doing it by themselves or in groups, any way they can, foot, bus, train, boat, and that allows for a lot of opportunity of harm befalling the kids. We've had children who unfortunately have been kidnapped and held ransom. And these gang members would contact the family member here in the United States, and the family member would have to pay to have the kids released. We've seen stories of rape and kidnapping, kids going days, if not weeks, without food. It's a hard journey, and they're oftentimes doing this all by themselves. A 13-year-old, 12-year-old traveling through a whole entire country by themselves. And so by the time they come to the United States, they've suffered a lot more than, than just what they suffered in their home country. So what happens when a kid reaches the border? What typically happens is that because they're coming to the United States without any legal status or a visa, they're going to be apprehended by Border Patrol, and they're going to be placed in something called the hielera, or the freezer. And the reason it has, it's a nickname, and the reason it has this nickname is due to the fact that this room, this holding area is, I don't want to say intentionally because it's never been on the record, but you can pretty much assume it's intentionally cold. It's very cold, it's very sterile, it's very scary. I don't know if any of y'all seen the pictures of kids and even adults just sleeping on concrete floors with those space blankets, those metallic space blankets. It's meant to keep them uncomfortable while they're being interrogated by border officials. After 2 or 3 days, they're then placed into the custody of the Office of Refugee Resettlement, or ORR for short. And this is a shelter and foster home that is meant to sort of house children while the government looks for a sponsor or an adult in the United States willing to take custody of the children. And so to touch a little bit about the ORR shelters and foster homes. So as I mentioned, this is, they're all government run, right? This is something managed by the government. They do contract out to private contractors, but for the most part, this is all managed by the government. And these shelters exist throughout the whole entire United States. It's not just at the border, but also in California, New York, Illinois, what have you. And for the most part, most kids go here, but if the child is less than 13 years old, so think of an infant or a baby, or if there's a special needs kid or what have you, then typically these children will be placed in a foster home, right? It's a temporary foster home. It's not necessarily a foster home for adoption purposes. It's just so that the child can reside more with the family as opposed to a shelter. These shelters, you can kind of see them as boarding houses where the kids go there, they sleep during the nighttime. In the day, they wake up, they have classes. Typically, the classes are given in Spanish and according to the age, not necessarily their education, but their age. So for example, a lot of our kids, they end up finishing 6th grade, but after 6th grade, they don't go to school anymore just because they don't have the means to do so. So even though they might be in 9th or 10th grade, they only have a 6th grade level of education. These shelters will teach them 10th grade material uniformly just because it's easier for them to do that. In terms of the foster homes, the children do go to school at the shelters, but at the end of the day, they go back to the foster family and stay outside of the house. What else do I want to mention? In California, we have 6 shelters in total. And in terms of, the LA, Orange County region, we have 2 shelters. They're not foster homes, they're just shelters, one in Fullerton and one in Laverne. And as I mentioned, or I didn't mention, but these shelters are meant to be confidential. Their addresses are not given out to the public. It's very hard to have access into the shelters. Um, I was fortunate enough to have worked when I first started as an attorney at the border in Texas, Harlingen, Brownsville, McAllen area, and I worked a lot with the children that were in the shelters. So I do have a little bit of experience of going into the shelters, seeing how it is. It is child friendly. You see a lot of, drawings and paintings and everything on the walls. But at the end of the day, it is a shelter. It is a detention center. Kids are not allowed access to phones or computers. They can call their family about twice a week or so, but not every day. So it's very hard. And a lot of the time, these children remain in the shelters for about on average 3 months. I've seen a child remain in the shelter for about 1 year. I even have a story from when I worked at the border where a mother adopted a child from birth. This child was abandoned, by the biological mother. And so the adopted mother took the child into her home, and they both came to the United States to look for safety and refuge. And unfortunately, the mother and the child were separated. The child was less than a year old. She was, I think, 6 months or what have you. And because the mother was the adoptive mother and not on the birth certificate, the government did not want to release the child to the adoptive mother's care. And so this child was placed in a foster home and for about a year or so while all of this was going on, courts, legal custody issues. And the sad thing in the end was that this child had known the adoptive mother for a year, the foster mother for a year, had only known her adoptive mother for 6 months. So at the end of it all, this child was now more attached to the foster mother than the adoptive mother. And it's a sad thing seeing that relationship being strained and disconnected, all due to being housed and not being released to the mother. And so that's all to say that, you know, it's not an easy process to release the children to the community, and it can take a long time, and it takes a toll on the kids. So I want to talk about the reunification and the release process. So as I mentioned, these kids are placed into the shelters while the government looks for an adult in the United States who's willing to take custody of the kids. This is called reunification, and the adult is known as the sponsor. And this sponsor could be a family member. Oftentimes it's going to be a parent, right? The parent came to the US in order to provide a better better life for the kids back home. But sometimes it could be siblings as well, grandparents, aunts, uncles, what have you. And oftentimes it could also be a non-family friend. So there's no connection between the child and this adult. They're just a family friend willing to help out. And what the shelters do is they do a sort of minimal background check where they want names, addresses. If they're an immigrant, they want, alien registration numbers and what have you. But once the child is released to this adult, this sponsor, typically the shelters don't do much follow-up work. They do something called a post-release program, but once the child's released, there's nothing that the government can do afterwards. They do a minimal screening and then they let the kids go. And if the kids are released to a bad home or disappear from contact, these shelters don't do anything. They just sort of, it's kind of the idea of like, it's your problem now, it's not in our hands, good luck. And it's very sad because I've heard stories of kids being released and then in a month, no one knows what happened to the kid. Typically they're released to a family member and I'm sure they just, went underground in order to avoid apprehension or any issues with immigration. But just the fact that, they disappear is startling. I remember there was one time I was speaking with a manager at a shelter where she told me that they never realized they've released 20 kids to this apartment complex over the past year, which is crazy because if you think about how big the United States and where family members are, to release so many children to one area is startling. That starts bringing up things of trafficking, smuggling. Why are so many kids going to one apartment complex in Florida? And the fact that they never picked up on this until it was too late, it's just startling, the fact that there's very minimal oversight as to where these kids are going. And as I'll talk about with family separation, it's especially troubling how they handle all this. And then the one last thing I did want to mention too is that during this background check of the sponsors, the information that the shelters do obtain actually can be shared with ICE and has been shared in the past. And so ICE is the agency charged with picking up immigrants inside the United States. They, as you heard, they'll do raids at schools, courthouses, jobs, wherever they can. And so the fact that for example, a parent wants to have their kid released from the shelter and taken and given to them, this parent has to essentially disclose that they're undocumented, that they're living in this household. Oftentimes the shelter might ask for all the members of the household, their info and their names and what have you. And now they're sort of on the radar, if you will. It's not always that they're picked up or placed in proceedings, but now they're at risk. And so what's happened is that a lot of the time, these adults no longer want to help the children. So now you have kids stuck in the shelter even longer because of this collaboration. Nobody wants to step forward and help the kids out of fear of being picked up themselves. And it wasn't always like that. I remember under the previous administration, the Obama administration, this was kept confidential in order to prevent this fear. The focus was on reunifying family and making sure these kids are not in an overcrowded home, but rather with family who can give them care and attention. But now the shift has focused sort of to trying to get as much information out of all of the immigrants and their family members as we can, causing this sort of scare.
I have a question.
Yes.
What's the average age? If they're all unaccompanied when they come here, what's the average age of them, or a mode or something that would tell us kind of what the typical kid is?
Yeah, so the average age is going to be between 13 and 17 years old, right? If you think about it, it's mostly the teenagers that are able to make these journeys on their own.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we do get a lot of kids that are younger. So, that's a good question. I want to say about 60% of the children are between 13 and 17, and then the remaining 14 are 12 and younger.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as I mentioned, a lot of these kids come from Central America primarily, mostly from El Salvador and Guatemala. Those are the two big countries that have the children coming here to the US. We do get a number of Honduran children as well. In terms of Mexico, there's not a lot of Mexican children. And the reason for that is because since Mexico is right smack next to the United States, it's easier for border officials or who have you to send those kids back, right? And you just sort of send them back over the border, and now they're back in their home country and therefore can take care of themselves, even though they might be from like the southern border of Mexico. Mm-hmm. But as for the other kids from the other countries, because it's more difficult to send them to their home country, they remain in the United States in these shelters, which is why we have 95% of the kids coming from Central America.
And are they mainly from the rural areas or from cities?
Mainly rural areas. There are kids from the city. Sorry, go for it.
Well, they're not savvy with urban ways then, or that sort of thing.
Yeah, no, they're not too savvy. And for example, they're all going to come from very small rural areas, an hour or so outside of the major city. I know, for example, in Guatemala, we deal a lot with the indigenous population. Mm-hmm. These are children from that speak indigenous language like Quiche or I keep forgetting.
Mom,
there you go, the M one, yeah. And so these kids not only are from rural areas, but they don't necessarily understand the city life and the city norms and what have you, and they're discriminated against and put down. So we do deal a lot with the children that are unfamiliar with that. And as I mentioned, they typically stop going to school after 6th grade. So their education is also limited by that fact.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So one last thing before we just jump into the policies is that, as I mentioned, there's no right to appointed counsel in immigration proceedings. All these children are expected to present their case on their own. And as I'm about to discuss, it's not easy. Asylum law is very complicated. Even to this day, I feel I have to still do my own research because it's a very nuanced and complex system that changes, especially under this administration. It changed so many times that that we needed to keep up to date. I think 1 or 2 weeks ago, there's been a recent change as to how asylum policies are going to be put into place, which I'll talk about on the appropriate slide. And so some things to consider when these kids are going to court by themselves is that they're essentially going up against a trained government attorney, right? This attorney knows the system, they know the loopholes, they know what to make, the arguments to make in court. And now you're expecting a 10-year-old kid to be able to, you know, present their case against someone like that. They have to plead to allegations. These allegations are obviously going to be connected to statutes and the law. For example, one allegation is you entered the United States with no valid visa or overstayed your stay in the United States pursuant to INA. I don't even remember the codes, but like you're expecting kids to be able to say that's true or that's false. And testifying under oath, right? A lot of the time these kids are scared to talk about their trauma, and yet in order to get a lot of this relief, asylum is fear of returning to your home country. Special immigrant juvenile status is the abuse, abandonment, or neglect suffered by a parent or both parents. In order for the kids to qualify for relief, they have to talk about their traumatic experiences under oath. And how do you get a kid to do that so openly and so willingly? It's hard, and they're expected to do this by themselves. And so it's not an easy system for the kids to navigate through.
I have two questions. First of
Yes.
all, I assume that translators are provided because the kids, I would imagine, mostly do not speak English. Second, please confirm that. And second thing is, are the judges, are the people in the robes there, the black robes, are they compassionate? Are they hard-nosed, or, you know,
So
what's the kid up against?
Yeah, in regards to the first question, when they do go to court, fortunately, an interpreter is provided. If they don't, as you mentioned, they don't speak, they typically don't speak English, and we wouldn't want them to try to navigate through the system in a language that they're unfamiliar with. So we do require that there be at least a Spanish interpreter at these hearings. If they don't speak Spanish, but they speak another language like Quiche or Mam, the court will postpone the hearings until they obtain an interpreter. So the courts do try to make sure that the proceedings are as fair as possible. And in terms of who they're up against, a lot of the judges on the children's docket are compassionate. They do want to see the kids sort of obtain the relief that they're entitled to. And so they will allow us more time to obtain the relief. They will give us a little leeway as far as the things we need to show. With that said, though, as of the past couple of years, there has been a huge hiring process as to the number of judges. And a lot of these judges are not trained in immigration law. They're not trained in handling children cases and trauma. Most of these judges come from the military sector, right? The JAG or have more experience in that area. And so you can see a lot of like battle-hardened, strict, no nonsense judges trying to, hear a child's case, and they'll treat the child like an adult and expect the child to, look for their own attorney by the second immigration hearing, even though the child can't do any of that sort. And so a lot more judges are very aggressive now and are very untrained in immigration law. And we're seeing that begin to leak into the children's docket. But a lot of the children's docket, at least here in Los Angeles, the judges for the most part are fair. So to continue on the immigration and policies and issues. So, we talked about family separation, zero tolerance policy. And I kind of want to give a background as to what that's about. So zero tolerance is this idea that all immigrants who come to the United States and are apprehended, regardless of your background, regardless of anything, you're gonna be placed in detention and then immediately placed in criminal proceedings. Typically, when an immigrant comes and is, grabbed at the border, if there's no flight risk, if there's no harm to the community, from the individual, they'll be released, right? So that they can fight their immigration case um, out in the real world as opposed to a detention center. But the zero tolerance policy stood for the fact that all immigrants, if they're apprehended, they're going to be placed immediately in criminal proceedings. And as I mentioned, that's separate from immigration proceedings, and to determine whether or not they're criminals. So the idea is they're criminals first, and they need to prove their innocence in order to be released. And a lot of the time, these families, these individuals that are placed in criminal proceedings, they come with family. They come with their spouse, with their children, what have you. And unfortunately, well, no, not unfortunately, fortunately, kids cannot be placed in jail. They can't be placed in prisons, but that doesn't save the parent. What happens is the kid is then separated from the parent. The parent is placed in criminal proceedings, and then the child is therefore unaccompanied and placed in these shelters. Even though they came together, even though the parent might not have any criminal background, they're separated. And so that's what was happening in the summer of 2018, the zero tolerance policy. And this only lasted from May 2018 to June 2018 before a court issued an injunction preventing the Trump administration from carrying this out. Unfortunately, a lot of kids were affected during that 2-month period. And it came out after more investigation was done that this had been going on prior to zero tolerance, sort of as a pilot program, and continues to happen after zero tolerance. So on this slide, I have a number of statistics at the bottom outlining the number of children that were separated from their parents. Now, one thing I did want to mention was the authority that the government had in order for them to carry this forward has existed for a number of years. And it's existed under the Obama administration as well. And what that authority stated was that when an individual presents themselves at the border or is apprehended, if they present some sort of criminal history or are unfit or dangerous for the community or have a communicable disease, then immigration officials have the discretion to either deport the individual or place them in criminal proceedings in order to, to have a trial. It's sort of the idea, if you will, is sort of, if we see an immigrant coming that maybe is unsafe for the community, we want to make sure that things are safe and we'll place them in these proceedings. But for the most part, that's not all immigrants. That's like a very small number. Most immigrants are refugees. They're escaping violence. They're coming for safety here. So not everyone was placed in these proceedings. The Trump administration took this far. They took it to the extreme with the zero tolerance. They practiced this idea from July 2017 to April 2018. And as you can see, over 1,500 children were separated from their families. In zero tolerance, in just 2 months, almost 3,000 children were separated. And then after the injunction, after the court said, you cannot do this, this is unconstitutional, the courts did allow for this criminal history or unfit or undangerous criteria to still be a factor. And the Trump administration, instead of going 100, they kind of just lowered it down. So that's why you still see a lot of kids being separated from their families. What has been done is KIND and a number of other organizations are part of this thing called the steering committee that's charged with trying to reunify children with the families. The sad reality is that this government did not put any protocols or infrastructure in place to make sure the kids are kept track of. And so that's how we lost a lot of kids from their parents, because no one thought to put in the computer, this kid belongs to this parent. They simply said, let's put this parent in criminal proceedings. This kid will go to the shelter. And then weeks later, when we're trying to look for the parent, there's no records because no one thought to make that connection. And so that's how a lot of the kids got lost in the system. Fortunately, Organizations have stepped up, are communicating with family members in home country in the United States, and are reunifying children with families as we can. I want to say there's about 400 to 600 families that are still, unaccounted for, that we are having trouble connecting, but we're slowly making that that leeway to reunifying the family. So I wanted to see if there's any questions on family separation just before I go to the other slides. No? All right.
One question. So
Sure.
I personally would like to get a copy of this PowerPoint presentation if you allow it.
Yeah.
If you allow it, would you send a copy to Mary,
Yes.
and then we will go to Mary and get our copies? Is that allowable?
That's allowable, totally. This is, we want to share this, and I did anticipate sharing this with Mary afterwards. As you can see, it's a lot of information. So I don't expect, everyone to have it written down. So I'll share it with the group, and that way you have access to the numbers and what have you.
Good, thank you.
No worries. So, okay. So moving on really quickly, with the Remain in Mexico policy, this was the idea that if you want to fight your immigration case, you have to do so not inside the United States as it's been traditionally done, but you have to do so outside of the United States, in Mexico. And it's been a very hectic thing, as roughly 63,000 children as of immigrants, families, what have you, have been forced to fight their case in Mexico. Again, a common theme. There is no system in place to keep track of these immigrants, right? You're expected to keep track of it yourself. You have to know when your hearing date is, and then show up to the border and say, my hearing is today, you need to take me on a bus to my court hearing. They will not come and look for you. They will not remind you. They will not tell you when your hearing is. You're expected to know all this information and then come forward yourself. Again, fortunately, NGOs, non-governmental organizations, have stepped up to try to keep track of everything and make this process as easy as possible. But unfortunately, it's just hectic. It's not an easy thing. As you can see, from the 63,000 immigrants who are fighting their case, only 500 have been given asylum. And so, as you can tell, the idea isn't fairness and making sure the laws are upheld. It's just about trying to keep people outside of the country. The Safe Third Country Asylum Claim. The idea of this is, traditionally, if I am fleeing my home country for safety and I come to the United States, I can apply for asylum, right? With this Safe Third Country Asylum Claim, the idea is that you have to apply for asylum in all the countries you've traveled through before you can apply for asylum in the United States. So, imagine I'm a kid from Honduras and I travel through Guatemala, El Salvador, and then Mexico to come to the United States. Under the Safe Third Country Asylum Claim, I have to apply for asylum in each of those countries before I'm allowed to apply for asylum in the United States. And I have to show proof that I was denied. I mean, if a lot of the kids are fleeing these countries for gang violence or cartel violence in Mexico, it's not likely they're going to be safe. But that's another way to slow down the process of immigrants coming to the United States. The sad thing is that the US Supreme Court did find that the Trump administration may enforce this policy temporarily. And so they allow it, but there was no rationale, no opinion was issued. And it's currently going before the Ninth Circuit to be reheard on different issues. Other changes that I'll touch on really quickly are the de-designation of UAC status, right? A lot of these children, once they're deemed unaccompanied, do benefit from that designation. For example, they're able to fight their asylum case in a more neutral environment, or they're able to forego some of the asylum law bans. For example, you have to apply for asylum within 1 year. If you're a kid, you're not going to understand that. Well, the agency in charge of issuing visas, they want to take away this designation so that the kids will then have to, fight their case as if they were an adult. Matter of AB, if you're a victim of domestic violence, that's not recognized for asylum purposes anymore. If if your family's a victim of violence, that's not a basis for asylum anymore. And then the matter of MACO just states that once the child turns 18, regardless of anything, they're going to be treated as an adult. And so, it depends on how you see it, but a lot of the time these kids are uneducated. They're not familiar with the system. They're all on their own. So just because they're 18 doesn't magically mean that they understand the system. They still need help, but the courts don't care about that. And then the last thing I want to touch on is just changes under the Biden administration. It's still very early to tell. There hasn't been any concrete plans as to what we can expect with the Biden administration, but they have said, they have put forward a lot of statements in support of immigration. Things such as Biden has come out to say that they want to overturn the travel ban issued by Trump, preventing individuals from certain countries entering the United States. Biden has also nominated Alejandro Mayorkas as the head of DHS. And Alejandro Mayorkas is very pro-immigrant. He's actually worked with KIND on a number of issues as they relate to children. The way I outlined it here is, although Biden is in support of immigration reform, one of the things that we should anticipate is just the time it'll take for change to occur, right? Executive orders are something that can be done immediately and quickly, but are very limited. As you can see, most of Trump's executive orders pertain just to the travel ban. So Biden will be able to overturn those immediately, but the other two policies and statutes are a little slower. Policies are dictated by federal agency heads. So the head of the Department of Homeland Security, the agency charged with overseeing immigration issues. All of the things I talked about, right? The Remain in Mexico policy and the third country asylum rule, all of that was created by DHS, the head of DHS. And so in order to rectify that, the new head of DHS would have to overturn these policies, but that's going to take time too. Biden has nominated Mayorkas, but he needs to be sworn in. He needs to, catch up on what's been going on, issue out policies that'll then trickle down. So it'll take a slow process. And then statutes and laws, these are made by Congress, and this is the most difficult to bring about. This is the fabled immigration reform that a lot of people are striving for. And it's very difficult to do. The last major immigration reform that I can think of was back in the 90s, back in the 80s with Reagan's amnesty, allowing all immigrants in the US who were in the US before 85 to get immediate immigration status, right? Or residency status. But we haven't had a major immigration reform like that since. A lot of the other things like DACA, the Dreamers Act, and the things we've seen with Trump come under policies and executive orders. But if we want to bring about changes, it's going to be a slower process. So with that said, I'll hand it over to Alejandra.
Hi, thank you. Let me go ahead and share my screen. 1 second. Okay. There it is. All right. Can you see the screen? Yes, okay, thank you.
Yes.
Okay, so now I just want to talk a little bit about how this work actually looks for us here at Kids Need Defense. But before that, I do want to preface this with just a very quick conversation about what trauma is and how it impacts the development of the child. And right now, I do also want to focus how the additional barriers that the pandemic has led our clients and their families to face, the social, emotional, and economic challenges. So first off, trauma is a deeply distressing or disturbing experience, but it's also a normal emotional response to an abnormal event. So for example, there's multiple different types of traumas. There's single incident trauma, which could be something like a car accident, where the feelings that you receive afterwards of, it could happen for weeks, maybe months or years on end, depending on the gravity of the situation, also depending on how it affected the specific person, but then there's also complex trauma. And complex trauma is something when a certain situation occurs to an individual, it's a reoccurring issue. So for example, that might be for our clients, if they're in their home country, we're under the care, like we were saying, of a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle. I do also want to state that for the, Josiel said this in the beginning, so if a mother, for example, left her country to come to the United States, I think there is like a common misconception that it's only because of economic opportunity. But in reality, a lot of times the mothers themselves are also fleeing some kind of violence that they face, either at the hands of their partner or some other kind of issue. If they're indigenous, it's also fleeing discrimination and being able to provide a better economic opportunity for their children. What ends up happening is then the children, when they become, like Josiel said, 12, 13, they're being forced to join gangs, or they will be killed. Or for the young girls, they're being forced to become the girlfriends of the gang members. So because they don't not want to do this, then they go through the very dangerous journey of migrating to the United States. So I do want to state a little bit about the picture that I have of the brain. So basically what ends up happening is like the development of the cognitive brain happens up to the age of 25. So as you can see, the red section, that's the reptilian brain. That's like the most, that's what allows us that's the section that has like the flight, fight, or freeze. So basically it's survival mode. So what ends up happening is that as long as you're able to have the support as you're growing up as a child, then your brain continues to develop fully. But what happens is if you're a child who constantly is facing trauma, then your brain isn't able to fully develop. So the neocortex section, which is the rational or thinking brain, doesn't work as well as it should. So then that's what happens a lot of times when we are talking with our clients, is the fact that the environmental cues or their experiences affect them in a different way. And it could also vary from our clients as well. We could have certain clients that are able to function, for example, in a school setting a little bit better than others, but then we have other clients that have similar traumas that still affect them different. So I do want to state this because I think at times if we end up meeting a client, for example, and I know I'm guilty of this, if I meet one client who is excelling, who's doing incredible, there is kind of like this idea of like, oh, well, then it's possible for all our clients, but that's not necessarily true. And I think we need to remain mindful about the fact that trauma does affect every single person in a different way. And it's not a good thing or a bad thing. It just means it's just understanding that there are going to be different types of needs for our clients. Okay, so when it comes to unaccompanied children and trauma, not only is it affecting the development of the brain, this also affects their mental and physical health. So we've literally seen it where individuals who face a lot of trauma end up actually also manifesting physical issues as well. I mean, we know that there's been, I'm not sure if you know, but there's a study of Holocaust survivors that have a way higher risk of having IBS and other kinds of like intestinal issues. So one of the fears that when I spoken to psychologists is the fact that when we're speaking about unaccompanied children, the amount of trauma that they face in their lifetime is something that psychologists have not studied before. So we're talking about trauma, generational trauma, which means it gets passed down genetically. So we're talking about, for example, if mother, this happens a lot in Latin American countries, but gender-based violence, but also a lot of just like the way that women were treated in Latin American countries in the world, but specifically that trauma of the mother, for example, gets passed on to the children, and that could come as depression or anxiety. And then on top of the gang violence that is faced in their country, and then the transition to get to the United States, like Josiel was talking about, is very, very traumatizing. To then be apprehended at the border by immigration officials, to be incarcerated and criminalized, to then come to the United States, have language barriers, especially if you're indigenous, to get placed in a situation or a setting where you don't understand not only the language, but there's also economic barriers and factors. It continues to like pile up on each other. And again, so these behavioral manifestations of trauma are often misread or misunderstood. So this could look, so this happens a lot, for example, where I'm doing my job in terms of trying to advocate for a client, if like their school administrator for whatever reason is trying to push them out or tell them to drop out or to transfer over to an adult school, which we know isn't the same thing. It's not the same amount of support, because, there's this idea that they're not working hard enough, or they're not pulling themselves up from the bootstraps. But the thing is, like, we have to understand that, again, trauma just really does affect every individual in a different way, and that doesn't take away their humanity or make them any less valued. So that's something also that I work with kids. If, for example, if we're having a conversation, this is before the pandemic, but we're able to speak to them. And if you do notice, for example, when they look away, they don't really speak up, this could be a response to the trauma that they have faced. They could also sometimes be aggressive. And again, this is just simply stating because the way that they are reacting to trauma is going to look very different. Oh, and also, if you're ever interested, the information slide that I have on the right is from this organization called ECHO, and they provide a lot of really incredible trainings about trauma-informed care. I highly suggest them. A lot of their information now is online, or they're doing webinars, but I really do, if you're ever just interested, I think it's always very helpful for all of us in the community to be able to understand how trauma affects each individual person. We all have traumas. We all have to work through these different things in our lives. So I think it makes the world a better place if we can be able to understand other individuals' perspectives, and we come at it with a non-judgmental attitude. So anytime there's any kind of trauma-informed care, I really always try to push that to individuals because I do think it's very, very helpful. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit now specifically about how the pandemic has affected our clients. I mean, we all know that during the pandemic, everyone has been negatively affected, especially essential workers, et cetera. But I think one thing that happens is that our clients definitely get to fall through the cracks constantly. But also, for example, our clients' families are the essential workers that are not considered essential workers. So, for example, they're undocumented, their parents are undocumented, their guardian is undocumented, they're the farmers, or for example, they're the dishwashers at different restaurants, et cetera, that are still open, but they're not the ones that are able to get access to the resources that are provided by the government because, again, they're undocumented. So all these issues are really just expanding the already very what's the word? The very vulnerable communities of our clients. So, for example, I have a client that I was working with last week, I believe, where the entire family tested positive for COVID. So now the breadwinner, who is the mother's indigenous family, is not able to go to work. So they did not have food. They called us to let us know that they were not going to have food for the next 2 weeks. So those are things that we're seeing a lot right now. And I think I feel like every single week I'm getting a new referral regarding a family who does not have enough money for food. The second thing that I do want to mention is those protections that were coming out in the state of California. I mean, I'm really thankful that we live in the state of California, but still even here, they're like I said, undocumented immigrants are continuing to fall through the cracks. So all these other kinds of, like, the eviction protection orders, they leave out our clients because our clients can be renting under the table, which means they could be subleasing within a home. We have families where there's 2 families, for example, in one apartment. And what I've heard when the pandemic started was like that their landlords would tell them, I don't care what the governor said, you have to pay me on the first. So, and this is, for example, a fear that they have because then since they're illegally subleasing, for example, then they don't have the right to be able to go to the to officials to let them know that they also are still being charged for the rent. There's also limited food access. So when there's food banks, for example, what ends up happening is that they're asked for an ID. Most of our clients don't have an ID. Thankfully, there's churches, if I'm able to speak to a church beforehand to be able to send clients, it's also really helpful. The thing is, we cover geographically not only the entire county of Los Angeles, we also cover Ventura, the Inland Empire, San Bernardino, and Orange County. So it is it's a lot of work because it's one social service coordinator for about 800 clients in Los Angeles. So it gets really difficult to at that point being able to like call each food bank to see if they're open or what days they're working, to be able to connect them to our client. And it's just physically impossible for me to be able to do that. So it is just really straining the entire system that was there to support our clients. Two, there is if you're over the age of 26, you do not qualify for Medi-Cal in the state of California. I do want to mention that there is in the state of California, if you test positive for COVID, there is a support that you can receive from the state. But again, this ends up happening until after you test positive. So there's no preventative care for our children and for their families. So even though maybe some of our clients can qualify for Medi-Cal, we know that, like we were saying, they live in a small home. They have a lot of individuals in one household. So if one individual ends up like testing positive, the risk is much higher, because even if they try to socially distance, they literally cannot because they do not have the space for it. So it's just, like I said, it's really just making everything a lot worse. Also, our clients do live paycheck to paycheck. So if they do test positive and like I had mentioned before, then they cannot work, then they do not have money to pay their rent. Again, that have a massive increase of requests for basic needs like diapers and wipes for children, for their babies, for their siblings. So all this is just, again, it's just growing. There's also an educational barrier. So when the schools were sent remotely, it actually just demonstrated the mass inequality that our children face. So for example, a lot of our clients don't have access to reliable internet. A lot of them were using their parents or their guardians' hotspot on their phone, but we know that their parents are working 40, 60, 70 hours a week. So if the parent is not home, they're not able to have reliable internet access. I know the city of LA specifically is providing like hotspots for residents of the city of LA, but that leaves out our clients in Orange County, in Ventura, in an Empire. There's the farther you leave LA, the harder it is to be able to connect them to the resource. And on top of that, also computer literacy. I had a client who was 7 years old, was living in Murrieta, just arrived, was recently released last year in 2020. And she was given, through my support and her mother's, we were able to finally get her enrolled in school. The mother is an indigenous woman as well, does not know how to use a computer, has also very basic education, if any. And then this 6-7-year-old is given a laptop and said, okay, start your class. But the difficulty is we're talking about multiple language barriers. So not only is Spanish her second language, now she is given a computer where she has never had access to one before, and now is expected to be performing at the same level as the other students in the United States. So like I said, it's just getting really difficult. I've had clients who were excelling, who were doing wonderful in school, were able to socialize, etc. And now because of the pandemic, they do not have access to these other kinds of resources or to their teachers, etc. Because you need a computer or you need a phone, you need reliable internet to be able to speak to other individuals and to receive support. Like I've said, I've had, unfortunately, some really brilliant and academically savvy students who were definitely on their way to community college or college drop out because they didn't have an access to a computer, and or because they know, like, in order to provide their family, they need to start working. So then I had also a lot of clients that were saying, actually, you know what, I stopped going to school, miss, because my family is really struggling. And this is the thing too, we're talking about 16, 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds who see themselves as adults to their younger siblings. So what ends up happening is that even though cognitively they're still a child, they perceive themselves as adults. So then they're putting themselves in a situation where they're trying to take care of other people as well. And I think honestly, it also just explains like the the humanity of them. Like if there's any kind of, if there's a time, for example, if I'm receiving kind of some donations or et cetera, to be able to provide to the clients. I've had so many clients, I've been doing this work for 7 years. I've had so many clients in the past who have said things like, oh, you know what, miss, like, actually, I'm okay right now. Why don't you give that gift card to someone who needs it most? And for me, it's just so telling and about um, on one, how powerful and how genuinely amazing these kids are. And I think this is why I've been doing this work for such a long time, because I really do feel it is an honor to be working with this community that is so resilient. But it is also, it's really heartbreaking. It is also very heartbreaking to know that individuals that are trying to just live and survive have it so hard, and all these barriers continue to just pile on and pile on. Um, like I said, so I was working when Obama was in the White House, and there were still issues that the immigrant community and the children were facing. I mean, with Trump, it was just got much more intense. But I don't doubt the fact that our children are going to continue to face even more obstacles or other kinds of obstacles while the new administration is going to come in. And also, lastly, because like the sponsors or their guardians, they have very limited education as well, or they don't have the capacity to help their own children. So it just makes it so much more difficult for our clients to be able to excel in life. Okay, and I do want to state that, like I said, it is a really difficult time. We don't know how long this pandemic is going to last. But the thing is also, we work with clients, so we work with individuals or a community that is very just resilient. And I think for me, the fact that they reach out to Josiel, to their attorneys, to myself, to let us know that, hey, you know what, I don't have enough for food for the week, or I'm running out of diapers. I think it's powerful enough for them to understand that there are individuals in the community that are here to help. And I think that's something that I definitely always want to make sure, that if there are folks that are in the community that are supportive, I'd like our clients to know that they're not alone. And I think that just lets them know that they're also welcomed in their new country. So in terms of how to help, there's many different ways. The first one, I do want to mention that our organization has a website on, I believe, I think you have to Google Kids in Need Defense. I'm not sure if it's Support Kind. I'm not sure, Joe, if you know, but I don't know the name completely off the top of my head. But you can actually like create your own fundraising campaign online. There's also a way to specifically support LA office and specifically support our emergency funds. So our emergency funds is like a pool of money that goes directly to our client. So we cannot, for example, give money to our clients for rent, et cetera, but we can use this pool of money to purchase gift cards to send to our clients. Or if a client needs to go to the court hearing, for example, we do want to limit their access or exposure to a risk of COVID. And the majority of our clients take public transportation. So we're able to use this fund to order them a Lyft or an Uber to ensure that, you know, there is limited access to the requirements that they have to go. For example, even if they're having to go to a food bank, being able to have a ride to these locations. Secondly is medical and dental support. I'm always super happy to speak to, even, you know, super early in the morning. It's fine. I love talking to anybody that's willing to hear me or talk to me about this this topic, just because it is really near and dear to my heart. So if there's any individual who is a doctor, or you know a doctor, or you know a dentist, especially in Orange County and Inland Empire, just because it's so difficult to get resources out there, please put them in contact with me. Give them my number, give them my email. I'm more than happy to help them. For example, I was able to get in contact with a doctor that works at the Children's Hospital of Los Angeles. And even though technically the clinic that he works for supports children that are under the age of 19, he makes exceptions for our clients who are a little bit older. And that is really, really helpful, because usually what ends up happening is that a client is reaching out to me when something has already occurred. For example, they broke their arm, they got hit by a car, and unfortunately, these are all true. Or some kind of situation happens, their teeth, like their wisdom teeth are coming out, it's extremely painful. and they don't have the time to be able to apply for Medi-Cal and wait an additional 3 months to see if they qualify. So it is just really helpful to be able to connect them to someone in the community who goes, yes, you know what, I'm a dentist and I'm willing to see someone, regardless if they have healthcare. I'm willing to do a physical, even if there's cases still pending, their Medi-Cal application is still pending. So that's always very helpful. Licensed social workers, therapists, especially if they're Spanish speakers, it's really, really helpful. But definitely you can provide them my information. There's also a psychologist that I work with that has now done, I don't even know, like free psychological evaluations that help them with their immigration case. So that's absolutely helpful as well. And lastly, spreading the word, just talking about this situation with your friends and family, and just reminding individuals of the humanity of the clients that we work with, you know, regardless of the country that they're coming from, regardless of their skin color, they are individuals that needs our support as well. And I do want to leave the last slide to talk about maybe just the more practical and easiest way to provide support during the pandemic. And it is through gift cards. So I know individuals love to send like actual donations, and we actually have a donation room in our office that I'm in charge of, and we stock it up with diapers and wipes and even toys, and it's wonderful. The only thing is that we have been working remotely for feels like forever now, and for our safety as well as the workers, our management is really limiting our access to the office. So therefore, and also like our meetings with clients. So it becomes really, really difficult to be able to send in-kind donations to our clients. So there was one week that I had six families that needed diapers, and something that would have taken me maybe like, I don't know, 2 hours before the pandemic is now taking me 16 hours to be able to complete. So it gets really difficult to be able to send or to coordinate for our clients to come in, and then for me to receive the permission, et cetera, to be able to meet with clients or to mail something or even go to the post office. But when it comes to gift cards, that is honestly just the safest way for both us, the workers, but also our clients to be able to get access directly to the needs. So for example, like I said, last week, we received a call about the two breadwinners, the parents who tested positive for COVID. And so now they're out of work. So for example, we can't even send them to a food bank because they understand that they should not be leaving their house and putting other people at risk. So then what is helpful is to be able to mail them gift cards for them to have an individual that's outside of their home to make the purchases for them and bring them to their house. So thankfully, there's a colleague of mine who works at a company. They donated $1,000 specifically for a holiday drive, which meant that with those $1,000, we were able to purchase 10 gift cards of $100 to provide families with a gift card to Ralph's or a Food for Less or a Target, and then they're able to purchase their own items. So if there's, again, if you want to get creative, if you want to figure out if there's other ways to help, please feel free to reach out to me. I always love any opportunity that I have, like I said, to talk about this and to be able to connect the resources and the community that is really here for our kids with our kids directly. And like I said, the best way to do that is through gift cards, or you can do that through do a specific donation, again, that you can like even write in your check, like Kind LA emergency funds. And then that way we can tap into those, purchase gift cards, mail them digitally or through email, or be able, most of them happen physically because most of our clients, like I said, do not have email, or maybe having a hard time being able to access just computer skills. So if you do, or if you can provide support, you want to do some kind of drive, etc., gift cards is probably the safest and the best way to provide support directly to our clients. And that's the end for us, I believe. I'm not sure just really have anything else to add, but like you can see here, here's his contact information, here's my contact information. Please feel free to reach out. whenever you want to talk about just ways of supporting our clients, or if you have a question, I'm more than happy to speak with anyone. And I just want to thank everyone for meeting with us this early and letting us speak. But it is definitely an honor just to be able to speak to individuals. And it also honestly makes me feel that I'm not alone when I'm doing this work, when I'm able to speak with people in the community that are willing to hear us out, and that also are here to in support of our clients, who honestly are some of the most incredible and funny and smart people I've ever met. Thank you.
And I just also want to piggyback off what Alejandra said. Thank you so much for, giving us this platform to talk about these issues. I honestly feel like a lot of the time, some of these things go sort of under the radar, especially the work Alejandra has been doing. As she mentioned, this pandemic has really highlighted the inequities that our clients face, and it really exposed, right, how mistreated not only our clients but their family members are. And so being able to share this information with all of you, I'm very happy to be able to do that. And I'll send out the PowerPoint slide to Mary. And if there's any questions, you have my contact information, our contact information.
15 minutes.
Don't hesitate to reach out. We're always happy to talk about these issues whenever possible. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions?
I had a question about about your budget and your resources. You get a lot of millions of dollars worth of, pro bono law clerk care. Where do you get most of your money from? Individual donations, or a government agency, or other nonprofits, or just churches, for example? What could a church do if they could help you?
So to answer the first question, I don't remember the breakdown, but I know we shifted a lot of our budget to be received now from private donors, fortunately. It used to be the case that we relied heavily on governmental agencies, for example, the federal government, the state of California, and then LA County and City. But we shifted over to the majority of our funding coming from private donors. It could be major organizations such as Netflix, Amazon, Disney, but also law firms as well, and then private donors who are open to donating, even if it's like a couple $100s or even whatever they can. That's where most of our donations come from. And then in regards to your second question, what can like a local church do? And I think Alejandra highlighted it best. Gift cards, donation, fundraising. That is the most influential thing that could be done right now.
Mhm.
I will say this, and I say this sort of selfishly, but also as a way to highlight it to you all. Any donations that are made to Kind are distributed amongst all the offices. However, if in your donation you do identify that you want these, donations to be given to the LA office, for example, then that donation will be, reserved for the LA office. So if any donations are made, I would just politely ask, if you want it to be made out to the LA office, just so that it would go directly to the kids in the community. But yeah, Alejandra, I think highlighted it the best, the gift cards and everything.
Yeah, and I could add just a little bit more on that. So one, in terms of the shift of being able to diversify the funding sources, definitely, again, for us as an organization, we saw the importance when the Trump administration came into power, because there were so many sister organizations amongst including us, who were very fearful about what the next 4 years would look like if it was another Trump administration, because there were going to be massive cuts to the support of the clients that we are serving. So that's why it is really helpful to receive donations just from a diversity of backgrounds, including individual donations, because they're super, it helps us be less reliable on something that may not be, that is kind of shaky. You know what I mean? It sucks that we have to rely on who is in power at the time to see if we're going to be able to even do our work. So I know a lot of other organizations have that same sentiment. And again, like Josiel was saying, to be able to, if what you would like to do is provide direct support to our clients, being able to donate and express that this funding is to be used for LA emergency funds, that allows us to save that pool of money directly for our clients. So that is really, really helpful, because I know, again, we weren't able to have our gala or different types of fundraising because of the pandemic. So like I said, it is really helpful to receive monetary donations or that go specifically for our emergency fund pool, because in that way, if one of my clients calls me and says, which happens, unfortunately, and they say, hey, I don't have a meal for today, then we're able to tap into this money and be able to send, for example, if it's like an Uber meal for that day, and then being able to send them through like express mail the next day, some gift cards, that is incredibly, incredibly helpful.
Thank you.
So Alejandra, just as we discussed with your partner there, if you would forward your PowerPoint to Mary, if you're willing to do that, she could send it to whichever of us would like to have it. Is that okay with you?
Of course, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're more than happy to send this to anyone. We definitely want this information to be out there. So thank you.
Josie, one question with regard to the facilities that are in the Los Angeles area, the one in Orange County and Laverne. How large are those? How many children are held in those? Are they full? Are they overfull? What's the status?
That's a good question. I saw a statistic for early 2020. I want to say they are able to house 30 to 60 children. I forget which one has a 30 and which one has a 60. And truth be told, I wouldn't be surprised if they're not full, just because of the way with the pandemic and the borders closed and the 15,000 children that came to the US. Given the low numbers and the exclusion that happened last year, I wouldn't be surprised if it's not full. But we do anticipate this. With Biden coming in, we don't know how soon, but we do anticipate that immigration restrictions might be lifted, causing an influx of children coming in, adults coming in. And LA County is the second highest county of children recipients in the nation. And so we are anticipating it. I don't want to say that it is going to happen or that there's evidence, but we do think that we should be preparing for it coming in the next few months.
Which also, I'd like to add, means a lot more resources that are going to be needed.
Yeah.
Because again, the clients that I've seen that need much more support are the ones that have been recently released, because there are, especially the ones that have been separated at the border from their family members, because again, they don't have a support system, or they have very limited support here and very limited financial support. So just everything just becomes so much bigger. So it's like, for example, even being able to get to a client to their asylum interview is a massive thing, when before maybe other individuals may not see it like that, because we have the privilege to be able to, one, know how to use public transportation, or two, have a ride or have a car. Our clients do not even have some of the basic necessities.
I have a question. In the past, I heard that when the children are released to a family, sometimes like they would have the family is expected to pay for the travel funds. Is that still a problem now? Like for the children to be reunited with the families, are they still having trouble like financing the airfare or the bus travel, or is that something that you're seeing still?
Well, when I at this previous organization, we had an individual that was set to help find where the child is and reunify him with the parent. But what we did is we ended up getting a hold. Maybe just so you could talk a little bit more after this, but I know that we got in a hold with the group. It's not even an organization. It was literally just a coalition of people called Miles for Migrants, and they were either paying or using their like credit card points to be able to send a client, for example, to purchase their ticket to send them to reunify the parent. So from the direct like aspect of that work, like I said, we were having someone from the community make those purchases.
And truth be told, I'm blanking out on that information, so I wouldn't be able to talk too much about it. But I do remember during the family separation time period that there were a lot of scammers calling just random, immigrant phone numbers saying that, hey, if you want to ever see your kid again, you have to pay us this amount of money so that we can send them to you. And these were just random scammers kind of extorting, people based off of the fear that's going on. I know that a public sort of campaign has been made to educate people, and it hasn't been as much of an issue in regards to the scamming. In regards to paying for transport and everything, I really wish I had more information. I apologize, but yeah.
Thank you. I was just, because I work with an organization called South Bay Cares right here in the South Bay. And we had done a fundraiser back at the beginning when all this was happening. And I guess it helped we provided, they use pseudonyms for their names to protect their identity, but they would provide the stories of individuals. We worked with a lawyer named JJ Mulligan. He's up in the Northern California. And so I was in contact with the legal services for children in San Francisco. I think that was the only contact that we had. So we did a fundraiser, but we had, these stories of kids, like one was an artist. And so he wanted to, when he was released, he wanted to, write a graphic novel of his experience, which I thought, was so good. And these other stories of just where they come from and some of the hardships that they've experienced. And it kind of brings the story, even though the money didn't necessarily go directly to them, but it was like samples of stories, and that kind of made the connection for a lot of people. And so that was a good thing. So, yeah, but thank you guys for your work.
Oh,
We
yeah,
we
no
have
worries.
time for one more very brief question, but it must be brief.
We just finished reading American Dirt a couple of months ago.
Mhm.
How credible was that depiction of the migrants' journey and the horrors that went on getting from Central America, say, or Southern Mexico to the border?
I actually heard that book was a bit controversial.
Yeah, because it was written by a non-migrant. But
Right, right,
that-
and also like their description about about how the Mexican people are portrayed, but in terms of like the cartel and etc. But I do want to say that even though it's like a work of fiction, that the things that they're talking about absolutely are things that are true. Like that we do know that the cartel. I worked in Mexico City for 2 years, and they're almost 2 years, and there are like fosas, which is basically massive graves that happen in different pockets of Mexico where there is a lot of violence at the hands of the cartel, for example, where you will find bodies of Central Americans, from 20 to up to 70 bodies at times that are kidnapped or killed, assaulted, etc. We know that we know it's 1 in 7 women or girls are assaulted when they are crossing. So the numbers are really high, even though that book is fiction. They're
Right.
things that they talk about, every single thing, I have actually worked with a client that has faced things like that.
So they took a facts and molded it into a story, a novel.
Yes.
But
Yes.
you feel that it's relevant and leaves the reader with an idea of how dangerous the trip is and how.
Absolutely.
Tony, we need to cut this off.
Yeah.
So it's almost 10 o'clock now. So thank you all for showing up. And Mary, thank you especially for doing so much of the detail work here,
Thank you.
making the connection. So we're going to shut it down.
Yeah, we have to go to church now, but thanks very much. This was a great presentation.
No worries. Thank
Thank you,
you all. Have a
everyone.
good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.